Hello, friends. Welcome to today's episode with Bushra Amiwala. I am just going to go and read her bio because there's so many amazing things. Usually, I kind of riff on what I know and I just keep going, but I don't want to miss it because Bushra is an amazing human being. And in her introduction, she doesn't gush nearly as much as I would probably about all of these incredible things that she's done. So let me take a little minute to just give you a quick bio of this incredible. Um, Bushra went down in the Chicago History Museum as the youngest Muslim elected to official office in the United States. She's a Glamour magazine's College Woman of the Year, 17 magazine's Voice of the Year, and she's internationally known as Cosmo Girl's Changemaker of the Year. She was on the cover of Time. She was in Forbes. She also, this is the amazing stuff. And again, I'm not always somebody that's all about awards, but this person is just next level. She is, whew. So there's a Hulu documentary about her called Our America Women Forward. And she's the female candidate in the pilot episode for Run, the series, which is on Amazon. There's a documentary about her on PBS called And She Could Be Next. And she's got a couple TED Talks, and she has WE Day or We Day in front of 15,000 people, a talk there. She's spoken in front of so many people. She's worked at many, many places. You'll hear all about her incredible background in the episode, but I wanted to make sure to just kind of list off those things because she was so wonderfully humble in not sharing that in this. I don't know if wonderfully humble is the word, but she was very humble in sharing this, her story. And I think you'll get a sense of why. She is very much a servant leader of sorts. She is somebody that normalizes leadership each and every moment of this conversation. And even at the end, where we talk about how important it is to share your story and occupy spaces yourself, she shares her perspective on leadership, which you can tell from so many of these accolades and these recognitions that it's not just by the titles and the awards that she's getting that you can see her walking the walk or hear about her walking the walk, but in this conversation you will feel it too. Her ability to share story takes, I believe, her message to the next level. So I'm super excited for you to get to know Bushra. Without further ado, here is the incredible episode with her. Welcome, Bushra. Thank you so much for joining on Checkbox Other. I'm so excited for you to be here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here too and looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, me too. Me too. Okay. First thing I always ask, give you the microphone and ask you to give an amazing Cliff Notes version of your journey. The twists, the turns, the aha moments, the pivotal things that have led you to who you are and what you're doing today.
That's a great question, and one that I've actually never been asked before. So, when I think back to pivotal points of my journey, I think certain milestones that stand out to me probably would be starting with eighth grade. I know
Yes.
the age of 13 is a pivotal moment for a lot of people, but for me, that's when I began wearing the hijab to school. And I definitely think that was a defining moment for me. From there, I think the next defining moment would be when I was 16, when I was asked to speak at my very first event. And it was in front of 500 people. And around that time, also, the GOP debates were happening for the 2016 presidential elections. Fast forward to when I was 18, 19 years old, I first ran for public office. I launched my political campaign as a freshman in college. And then from there, I lost my first election, got elected, ran for office again a second time, got elected in 2019. And then from there, graduated college, and now I think here I am. So those are kind of like the highlights that I would call out. There is so much in between that I'm sure we will unpack and uncover, but I think those would be the defining moments.
I love it so much. And let me tell you, I think that was probably the most, while you've never heard the question before, the most efficient and effective way of hitting that. I felt like I went through your timeline. I felt like I got a little, you think about like the beginning of a movie when they run you through that to like get you there. You did a perfect job of it. So thank you. You're a pro. So I think sprinkled a little bit of this in the front end, but I'd love to hear if there's any time in your life where you have felt other or different. And I always welcome more than one story if you have it. Feel free to kind of bring whatever you want to the party. But I would love to hear that other experience and how that's, again, shaped how you approach the world, look at yourself, look at the world around you.
Of course, that's a great question. And I think one that other people really could benefit by hearing people's responses to. So thank you for asking. So for me, times that I felt other or different, I actually talk a lot about just my childhood. So I was born and raised in Rogers Park, which is the north side of Chicago. And growing up, I went to CPS, Chicago Public Schools, and I remember seeing a lot of kids that looked like me, right? Like I fit in with the brown kids, but and I realized that we had a lot of similar attributes and traits. But as we kind of delved a little deeper, a lot of them identified as Latinx, and I identified as Pakistani. So although we kind of looked similar and were grouped together demographically, the second language that both of us spoke were completely different,
Yeah.
right? Like Spanish and Urdu, like the two most probably different languages you can put together. Yet a lot of my friends, especially at that age, looked like me, I think had similar traits to me. I think we had shared lived experiences, such as translating documents for our parents at quite a young age as well. Like things like that, I think really made me feel like the things that made me other, I saw others that shared that with me. But when I moved to Skokie at the age of 9, so Skokie is now, 3 miles north from the city of Chicago, and it is an incredibly diverse village. There are literally signs that people have that say, hate has no home here. And although it's kind of like the talk that people are preaching, experiences differ from person to person. So I kind of alluded to this, but at the end of eighth grade, I made the conscious decision to begin wearing the hijab to school, which is an Islamic covering that symbolizes modesty. So, those who are visually watching, you see that I'm covering my head right now, and those who are listening, I just told you that I am. Therefore, take my word for it. And to wear something that symbolically represents your faith is a very interesting concept that I don't think I'd ever given too much thought to before. But what's interesting, it's not a bracelet you can tuck under your sleeve or a necklace you can hide under your shirt. It's at the forefront. It's the first thing a lot of people noticed about you. And when I first began wearing the hijab, I realized that a lot of people had a hard time looking past
Mm.
my religious identity, which is so interesting to me because if it was almost as though I was stripped of the personality, the character, the values, the beliefs, and it's like, oh yeah, you're that Muslim girl.
Yeah.
And I think those instances of feeling otherized are ones that I've seen in my early childhood and upbringing, and then it's followed me along the way as I later ran for public office, interviewed for corporate jobs, spoke at national conferences and international conferences, have had like all of these like interesting experiences in between. But I think the core thing that
Yeah.
somehow always creeps its way and finds its way as an experience is feeling different because people see me and assume that maybe I can't speak English or assume that I'm not from here or will talk super slowly and be taken aback when I speak at a normal pace in
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
So those are the times I think I felt the most other.
Yeah. And I can imagine, I mean, in the fact that, okay, 9-year-old you then translate to 16-year-old you hopping on a stage in front of 500 people, like how powerful it is to be occupying space and to be showing up as the full human you are in front of others, to whether or not I can't control how you show up with me, but I can show myself. I think is a really powerful way to kind of navigate the very real experience that 9-year-old knew deep, right? Like we
Mhm.
always talk about little, oh, well, we need to shield the kids. The kids feel things. Like,
Mhm.
kids are human beings that likely don't have the socialization built in as much. So it's very obvious how powerful it must have been and continues to be not only showing up as yourself visually, where people are trying to kind of process the elements of what you're talking about how you're showing up so overtly with your religion in a country that also a lot of people show up very overtly with their religion, but is normalized. And still being like, hey, let's have conversations. Yeah, sure, we can talk about the identity elements that are standing out to you, but like, let's have conversations that go deeper so we can connect as human beings and full-fledged human beings. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience has been like in not only sharing your story, but connecting with other people's story who might be different than
Oh, yeah, that is such a good follow-up question to what we were just chatting about. So, a story that I'll share that just came to mind when you asked that question was when before I ran for political office, I worked for a Republican senator's U.S. campaign, and um, it was his reelection campaign. And I don't think from a like policy standpoint, I resonated with a lot of what um, people from that side of the aisle believed in. Yet for me, it was one, really valuable field experience, and two, I wanted to get a firsthand look of what it meant to be Republican. So my job was to go door to door to various registered Republican voters' homes and ask them a series of 5 questions. And essentially was like doing polling and surveying data to see where people stood on what issue, and the senator would then shape policy and his stance around those issues accordingly.
Yeah.
So um, my job was to ask 5 questions to the people's doors that I would knock on. I would input the data into this app, and that's it. Move on, go to the next door. Uh, and I actually did not pre-read my questions prior to starting.
Yeah.
Just didn't really think I needed to. I was like, I can read, like I'll be
I got this.
fine. And knocked on my first door, person answers, and I open my app, I press start. And the first question on that list was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fearsome are you of an Islamic terror attack on US soil?
Stop it.
And that was the first question I had to ask. And the person at the front door laughed,
Right.
and because they were so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I kind of laughed because I was like, yeah, we're all just joking here. Like, clearly, like, something's up. And, this woman looks at me and she goes, 10, very fearsome. And me standing at her front porch wasn't helping. And it was through that campaign where I finally, I think, was forced to have these difficult conversations with literally people who not only were scared of me, but
Right.
I guess fundamentally disagreed with me too. And in spite that, I'm now employed through this internship. Therefore, I have to maintain professionalism. I
Right.
can't let my emotions get the best of me. I have to maneuver this conversation with tact and the responsibility that comes from this. Therefore, as I went on, I kind of just started inserting my own question number 1.5, which was, why? This actually was one of my favorite questions as a kid, too,
Yeah.
as I think a lot of us did. And the first time I was able to ask, like, oh, okay, 10, why? And people would say, well, you're the first Muslim person I've ever met.
Oh,
That may or may not have been true. Perhaps I was the first visibly Muslim person
right.
that someone had met. All of that to say, I really, I think, learned a lot about how to have those conversations with people who have different beliefs and ideologies. And if anything, it helped me build empathy with something. So I went back to my fellow interns that day after asking, my new question 1.5, and people would say, well, Bushra, these people haven't met a Muslim person before, and their perception of Muslims comes from the media.
Right.
Can you blame them?
Mhm.
Like, well, without justifying ignorance, like bigotry and racism, I guess you have a point. I
Right.
think I see your point.
Yeah.
And I think since then, I've been on this very intentional and conscious mission for how not only I show up in this world, but how I am displaying myself outwardly into other people's world who might not personally ever know me, but come across my journey and my story. And if I can rewrite someone's preconceived notion by just serving as a counter example or an example that isn't traditionally seen, then to me that became a job well done.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so the interesting part of all of this is the idea that when you see a real life human being that counters your belief on something, are you willing to allow yourself to
Mhm.
answer the why, ask the why, and understand that you have the choice to evolve past that? To act as though we don't live in a world that is conditioning us and socializing us and indoctrinating us into beliefs, whether it's about people's identity or who we believe ourselves to be, what safety looks like, what success looks like. I think it is really, really powerful to honor not only the experience of standing, I mean, I, first of all, I have no idea if it was cold or not, but as you were telling that story, like I pictured you in like a coat, comfortable, like, oh, okay, this is a little uncomfortable anyway. But like the experience of putting yourself out there, representing maybe something you don't necessarily believe in, but getting the experience. So there's just a whole lot of vulnerability you're showing up with in the first place that the person on the other side of the door doesn't know at all.
Mhm.
And still being able to stand in that and be the connected human with those folks, even though all the socialized indoctrination is stirring all around you, is incredibly powerful. And I think is hopefully a lesson that we don't often see. We often, if we see anything like that on TV, there's a quick and usually not really kind or human interaction that happens on the other side of an exchange where one or both people have been dehumanized. And so it's really, really powerful to hear not only your experience of doing that in that moment and many moments following door to door, but also in how it seems to have shaped the way that you are interacting with folks, whether or not you share beliefs, whether or not they are able to fully understand who you are, where you're coming from, and the same way for you and them, as you're saying, activated empathy of you is so powerful. We just had a guest actually um, who was the first African American tour guide at a plantation in Tennessee, and her experience in just again holding the space as somebody that looked different, talking about the thing that usually is not. We don't really acknowledge the humanity on the other side of a situation, was just inherently activating the humanity in each other, but then pushing it further to say, let's think critically about this. Again, activates the, I think of when you say the why is your favorite question. Yes, it was mine 5 times over, but it activates the permission for that person to really identify what are my values versus what was told on the news 5 minutes ago and how am I just regurgitating it. Can you talk a little bit about any kind of, I mean, you shared this in just opening the door and people kind of opening a little bit. I'm sure not everybody did, but what that's been like for you as you're stepping into positions of representing larger swaths of people to be able to say, okay, I've had this experience where maybe I'm out there advocating or at least gathering information from somebody that may not be on the same page as me. But now I've been elected to a public office that I'm representing a whole bunch of people that don't necessarily share the same identity as I do.
Yes, that is such a good segue into some of the things that I've been able to do upon getting elected, but also kind
Yeah,
of what the tactics are in terms of ensuring that although I'm a direct reflection of perhaps the Muslim community, like you put a mirror in front of you, you look
right.
like them, right? Reflection. I hope to be a representation for all communities in
Yeah,
my district, of course. Which I hope goes without saying, but definitely is something I had to emphasize a lot of the times because there were questions that I would be asked that I think other candidates weren't as frequently. That would be, well, how do we know that you will represent us in a fair, accurate, and precise manner? And to me, I think it's a fair question that can and should be asked of every candidate. And when it's not being asked of every candidate at the table, that's probably when it's not fair. But I honored the question, and that's where policy and platform comes into play. And apart from that, some of the things that I've been able to accomplish while on the Board of Education is that we had a lot of families, specifically from the Muslim community, reach out to me and share that their children have dietary restrictions, which would mean that they would eat only a specific type of food. In this instance, it's called halal food. And for me, I was like, okay, of course, it's a no brainer for me to advocate for this policy change, for us to accommodate for this type of food and have it be accessible for students. But it's always a yes and conversation. It's what other communities and groups of people also have dietary restrictions that while we're revisiting this policy that we can accommodate for as well, even if they aren't the ones who are necessarily knocking on my door, calling my phone, asking for this type of work to be done. It's not, we're not just advocating for one group. So what's interesting is Skokie, the town that I live in, after the Holocaust, a great deal of survivors came to Skokie. And it's a historically has very strong roots that are Jewish, Therefore, I would be doing a huge disservice representing a town in Skokie, bringing forth halal food by not even considering kosher food as well. Therefore, it was halal and kosher food that we wrote into our policy and now have and provide for our students. So to me, that's kind of what that looks like. It's a yes and always conversation. And there are so many things that I've voted on, that I've advocated for, that I've spoken up about, that um, have nothing to do with my background or my faith or what I stand for, but it does for a different person in the community. And to me, I honor that as if it was my own too. And I hope that that's my methodology that I continuously have and showcase while serving in public office.
Well, that was absolutely beautiful. And I hope that that gives an invitation to people listening to take a look at what you see as normal, personally as normal, and then collectively as normal, and giving that permission of noticing, to then not just notice the one thing, but to open the door. Because I think that one of the biggest hindrances, and it sounds, open the door is literally what we were just talking about, right? You standing in front of someone's door, knocking on it. But like, the thing that tends to happen when we have conversations in this country in particular around inclusion, around identity, around diversifying our options to be just equitable at a baseline, is that we only have room to advocate for one need and not everybody else's, because we just don't have the resources, we don't have the attention, we don't want to confuse everybody. And it's fascinating because personally, when I do work in DEI, I'm always like, once you open the door, it's the same door, maybe different language, maybe different comfort levels, maybe just a little bit of different education about something you don't know. But giving yourself permission to see the world from lenses that are not just yours is something that we have the capacity and ability to do, but we haven't always had the permission. And so I think really just walking that walk and showcasing that without it being some big, let's have a fanfare parade about the fact that I added this too. It's like, no, this is just a normal ability to do this. It's like when you open the door, look how far the door actually opens. Yes, we've only opened it like 5 inches, but it can open many, many feet. Let's do that. And give permission to the fact that that's not necessarily scary. Things aren't going to break because of it, though it's been rigid before, doesn't mean that we need to be afraid of the fact that other people can be seen holy. And so I think there is such a powerful element to, again, just like normalizing what is revolutionary, because unfortunately, at this point, we have such rigidity and we have such division based on not being near one another, that to normalize it being okay to be connected to each other, even if it doesn't appear that we should be or would be, at least this is why I like threw my career up in the air. I was like, let's go do this, because I think that it is something that we have inherently within us. It just takes effort and permission to allow ourselves to take the kind of rigidity away from us, to be like, hey, it's kind of like little kids without the socialization, like, you want to be my friend, to most people. And it's when they start learning otherwise, that that's not safe, or this isn't okay, or you don't belong there, or you're good and they're bad. That's where those kind of barriers come up. So as adults, we think we're set in our ways, but we're just, there's little kids in us asking why. Oftentimes we've just silenced them. And so giving that permission back. As I say all this, the thing that's coming to my mind is there was an event that I went to in 2016. So around the time you were talking about doing canvassing, speaking on Sages 500. I went to this event that was in Massachusetts, and it was all of these women that had run for office. Not all had, well, all were successfully holding office or had successfully held office, but every single one spoke about the loss that preceded the win, or the losses that preceded the win, and how important it is to normalize the fact that normally before you're holding office to represent people, there is a loss. There's an L in the column. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like as a freshman in college, first of all? Because I think of myself as a freshman in college. I was trying to figure out way too much about who I was, how I could operate in the world, getting all the classes, playing soccer, like all the different things I was doing. And now stepping out as yourself, running a campaign as your identity, I'm assuming, I'm making a lot of assumptions, is still shifting, changing, and then bouncing back to then come and run again.
Yes, that is such a good question. And So for me, when I first ran for public office, I launched my campaign in March of 2017, which was 2 months after then President Donald Trump got inaugurated to office. And in March of 2017, it wasn't trendy to run for office. It wasn't cool to have representation. It wasn't accepted to have someone and who looks like us representing us, because that just wasn't what was happening at the state of our nation at that time. Not to say I like started a trend or a catalyst or anything of that sort, but um, momentum plays a very heavy role in these types of journeys. And for me, when I launched my political campaign, I happened to run against a 16-year Democratic incumbent. So the office that I really had my eyes on, someone had been in that seat for 16 years. And there had been rumors and talks that this was his last term. Therefore, I was like, okay, it might be an open seat. Long story short, was not an open seat, was not an open term. So now I'm a 19-year-old person running against someone who has been in this position alone for 16 years.
Yeah.
And there was a third person who ran in the race, and rumor has it to split the vote, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, I don't get elected. And I came in second with about 33% of the vote. And at my election watch party, there is a reporter who comes up to me with kind of a camera and a microphone. And I'm in tears at this point. I'm
Yeah.
literally crying. And he goes, "Will you run for public office again?" I'm crying. And I was
Come
like,
on.
no. And that's just, I think, what my innate response was at the time, because to me, this is something I was working towards for a full year at that point. The election was in March 2018. And then to have a public loss, like, a lot of people know that this is something you were working towards and then you didn't get it. I never experienced something like that before. And I still kind of don't have the words for what that defeat feels like. Um, right? You've set a purpose for yourself and you've imagined and envisioned a life for yourself around this one thing coming into fruition, and it just doesn't. And you're like, what? And, there was someone watching that news segment that evening who called me first thing the next morning, and I guess really felt some type of way about my response of, no, I'm not going to run for public office again. And who were so kind and genuine and shared, you've registered thousands of people to vote for the first time. We had historical voter turnout come out because your name was on the ballot. Like, these are the instances where you've won. You have to run for public office again. I will support you. Just don't run against me. And it was my former opponent. And he became a dear, dear friend and mentor of mine and encouraged me to run for public office again. And with his support and his blessing, I did 6 months later, this time for the Board of Education. And in a crowded race of 7 people, I got elected in April 2019 and went down in the Chicago History Museum as the youngest Muslim elected official in the United States.
Yes. Just so you know, I got chills all through my body from that story. First of all, let me just acknowledge this incredible storyteller. I hope that you know that and feel that and like honor that about yourself every day. I love that story on so many levels. And the power of whether or not it was your opponent that said that, the power of a voice reflecting. Remember, we were talking about before, you're like, if you look in the mirror, do you look like me? That kind of reflection, but somebody reflecting yourself back to yourself, whether they look like you or not, and saying, no, 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 here is the value and the pivotal influence that you've had on this process, and having people feel represented, whether or not the end outcome, the mountaintop, was what was expected, how powerful that is. And again, I think we live in a culture that is very much, try not to get on my like uber masculine horse here, but like is very much about the end goal, the finish line, the crossing the line, the beating everybody else. And yet so much of that growth happens in the journey, happens in the climb, happens in so much of it, that if we don't win or beat whoever we think we're going to beat in a race, then it kind of, we have this belief, or at least socialized belief, that it wasn't worth it. But if you look at it under a longer tail, most things that are really, really powerful and important take time. and have a lot of stumbles and a lot of falls and a lot of failures that get you there. But oftentimes, again, we live, I don't know if you've seen this recently. There was an article talking about how our attention spans have gone from like 2 minutes to 45 seconds. It's like our ability to even just pay attention has gotten shorter. So the fact that we assume that we'd be able to appreciate the pivotal moments of a longer journey,
Mm.
it's again being socialized away from us. But
Mm.
I'd love to hear from you about what is the role that you have now on the Board of Education. You talked about kind of the dietary dynamics of being able to make people feel cared for, seen, held, supported in how they're consuming food, fuel to be able to be at school. Can you talk a little bit about what a local official is does, and what you feel like people probably don't know about that? Because I think, again, 2018, 2019, I think people were getting more engaged, whether that be in pushback to elected officials, or just realizing that the system itself isn't just happening behind the scenes without people's contribution. But I'd love to hear a little bit about what local officials are doing, especially in the Board of Education level. I know personally in my hometown, we've had a little bit of drama that went viral for a little while, of like a hot mess at a Board of Education meeting that was shaping a lot of how the conversation was going outside of just the topics happening there. So I think really talking about the pivotal impact that you have as a Board of Education member would be helpful.
Yes. One of my favorite questions to answer. So a lot of people actually don't know what people do on a board of education, who their board of education members are, and proximity matters. So when you have a ballot in front of you when you're casting your vote, members of the board of education are probably one of the last people on the ballot you'll see.
Yeah.
Which from a hierarchical standpoint doesn't mean we're any less important than any others. If anything, we have greater responsibility of how we're ensuring our tax dollars are spent to support the next generation of
Yeah.
leaders, right? Our students. So our job as Board of Education members is technically, the job description is to manage, oversee, and hire the superintendent of our school district. So similar to how there's like a board that oversees the CEO of a company for a business.
Yeah.
Same vein, it is a board that oversees like the superintendent of the school district. So all of that to say, sometimes, especially when I first got elected, there will be exciting ideas or things that I as a board member would want to implement that doesn't fall within my job description or purview. Therefore, now my role has actually adapted into becoming someone whose job it is to be fiscally responsible, to ask the right questions, to challenge some of the notions, to ensure we're thinking outside the box, and things of that sort that are a bit more administrative than they are as proactive. And it's interesting because now you learn how to work within the confines of the box. So I think it took me a full year to fully understand what I could do as a Board of Education member. After that year, the pandemic happened. So now we're spending a whole year trying to adapt into this new normalcy of virtual learning. A year after that, we had administrative turnover. We lost almost 40% of our admin staff. Um, because times are tough and we already have a shortage of teachers and admin and staff in the education space, but we really felt it then. Therefore, now we're transitioning to new leadership. We're conducting interviews, trying to stay afloat, and now the vaccine comes out. So now we're transitioning back into school. Like, we want to get people back into school as quickly as possible. And now we finally have had a normal year. I recently went to the Mary Poppins Junior play that our students put on. It was such a well done production, and my term is up now. It's been 4 years, and I'm running for re-election, and I'm excited to share I'm uncontested. Therefore, there is more work to be done, but that learning curve of 4 years, really, it makes sense why the common person probably doesn't have a deep understanding of what a board of education member can and should do, because I, as someone who got elected to the role, had a skewed perspective because I was campaigning on traits that no one even bothered correcting me, saying like, that's actually not in the job description. For example, was like, I'm going to change curriculum to be inclusive. It's like, you don't do that. The director of curriculum and instruction does that.
Right.
You can ask them questions during the board meeting when they present, but you're not going to do their job for them. And That's why having a trusting admin team is so important. A common misconception that a lot of people also have about those who hold public office is that um, a lot of us are very inaccessible, which I think historically perhaps may have been done intentionally to keep people away from those who are making decisions. But at least for someone like me, like my email and phone number is quite out there. Like it's not that hard to get a hold of. I manage all my own social media platforms, and I, as a one person, don't have any staff. I
Mm,
respond to my own emails. I schedule my own meetings. And it's interesting to say these things as if it's like a big deal. Like these are all tasks that the ordinary person does. And I emphasize that and say that because just because I'm elected to public office does not mean I am granted an abundance of resources to service in a certain way.
yeah.
It's kind of what you make of it. So, one thing that I'm actually really excited to share is that growing up in these public schools, right? I'm serving the district that I once was educated in. I remember the only times we talked about Muslims in the classroom was in reference to the Ottoman Empire and 9/11.
Yeah.
And for me to grow up and become a Board of Education member, I had the opportunity to collect thousands of witness slips in support for a piece of legislation. And I had the opportunity to testify in front of the Illinois General Assembly to showcase the positive contributions of Muslim Americans in history. And this law passed. And now every public school in the state of Illinois has to teach the positive contributions of Muslim Americans in history, along with other minority faith groups, because it's always yes and.
Yes, I love that. Oh, more chills. Hit me with all the chills over here. First of all, I'm so excited that you're running again. Second of all, I just want to acknowledge that those 4 years were not a normal 4 years for a Board of Education member. And you, I feel like, did such an amazing job of like charting a very quick path through that. But like when you think of the education system and how it's been stretched, pushed, challenged over the last 3 years, uh, that is something that has not happened in a long time, if happened at all, in the concurrent events that happened, not just in how do we logistically make that happen, but the political pressure, the vitriol that was centered around so much around school, around how kids are going to be able to handle this, around safety, around so many things that usually a board of education isn't dealing with in such a high pressure cooker situation. Um, can it's fascinating that that all is happening and you're like, and I got all these other things done too, because I can only imagine, as you're talking about, this isn't your full-time job, this is, it's something that you are doing on top of, and also being able to be the part of the being accessible and having and womaning all of your social media, your inbox, your schedule, your everything. How, I don't know, there's a part of this that, as you just said, the 40% of admin too, not being there. There's just a part of my brain that's like, you just normalize so much of that as like, oh, it's just what we're doing. And my brain's like, no, it's not. If this was happening, like if these were happening at a company, the company would be like 5 alarm fire. There's something going on here. How, I mean, there's a part of me that's like advocating and wanting to like, I don't know if it's like a big sister energy, protect the energy for you because you're putting a lot into this. How do you see hopefully the next 4 years coming out of this, what I would assume is transformative period, whether it was through growing pains that were extremely painful or not, the kind of, I think of growing pains as literally like people coming in with their pants too short, right? Like there was a huge amount of growth that happened. How do we reclothe? How do we readdress how we can handle this new body that we're in, or this new reality that we're in as a Board of Education member, and also as people having their relationship with what the Board of Education is doing, what education systems are all about now?
Great question. So we are actually at a point right now on our Board of Education where every 5 years we get together with our admin, the board, teachers, community members, parents, any stakeholder in the community, and we construct what's called a 5 year strategic plan. So vision for our school district. So
Yeah.
we actually, it's a strategic planning year right now. Therefore, what better time to ask a question such as this one about looking forward, right? We just talked about looking back and now looking forward. And some of the things that we integrated in our previous strategic plan, which we have now as the board implemented, For example, STEAM initiatives were a huge priority for us. So 5 years ago, we didn't have a robotics club. We didn't have engineering resources. We had a Mac lab, which was the
Right.
extent of the technology present in our school. And now, just this past month, the robotics students from our school district came in second at the state championship.
Yes.
And it's
Okay.
like we didn't even have a robotics team prior to that. Therefore, looking forward, all the goals that we're setting, we've coined them as SMART E goals, i.e., inclusion and equity at the end, right? So, like specific, measurable, achievable, um, reasonable, and time bound. I'm pretty sure what they stand for, but the IE, right?
Yeah.
Inclusion and accessible. I think equity is the name of the game now. Like that is our whole, like doubling down our focus on just equity and inclusion in whatever which way that looks like, coupling with the things that we already want to do to achieve and advance success for our students.
I love that. It's so pivotal and powerful because it's not one of the things that I think that I don't know if you've been seeing anything around this lately, especially with a bunch of layoffs in the corporate space and the tech space in particular. There's a lot of conversation around how companies are uh, moving their priorities away from the DEI space. That that has it seems more like it was a trended element versus a real investment in people, and not only people in systems in sustainable organizations. And it's really fascinating because I think the
Mhm.
way that you started talking about the incorporation of a halal offering was really really important. Um, but also how it's like building a house with a strong foundation versus feeling like, all right, let's just get this foundation up and then renovate from the other side.
That's a great question. And I think one of the reasons why we're in this inflection point of being able to even have an IE at the end of our SMART goals is because we started an equity committee upon getting elected 4 years ago. Therefore, it has been a long time in the coming. So to now see something be written in stone in our 5 year plan, it's taken 4 years of equity work on the board level to even get to that point. And I think I agree. It's not about who can get it faster because it's suddenly a trend now. Because when you're doing the work for the sake of doing the work, it's not about showing it to someone else. It's not about getting the applause temporarily. It's about making the change. And that's something that can only be done with genuine care, I think authentic leadership, and prioritization for sure.
Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, one of the things I love that you just said, I just want to bubble up a little, is talking about how important it was for it to not just be, okay, this is something we're doing, let's spread it out to everybody right now, let's just go. It was about building the deep roots, understanding and seeing the impact on the level of the people that are making the decisions and people that are managing and leading the charge of, hey, this is something that's important. Hey, this is how we're going to implement it. I think oftentimes we again, I mentioned earlier, our attention spans are short. We think that we're experts because we read a tweet about something or we saw an article or we saw a headline about it. And so we should just start acting right away. And one of the most important parts of actually making lasting change is giving it time for the awareness to be cultivated, but also for the education to be there to understand and be able to have that sink in. So it's not just like you're batting it around. I think a lot of times when we think about school, or at least when I think about school, a lot of the way that it was approached is like, all right, learn the thing on the flashcard for the test. And then at the end of the test, hopefully some of it sticks. If it doesn't, you still got an A on the test. And that's kind of how I think a lot of sticky, trendy issues, sticky for the moment, viral for a moment, issues are being handled that we're like, okay, cool. That was a thing like 15 minutes ago, but now the next 15 minutes is something different. And let's either like lobotomize that part of our brain or let's move our outrage to somewhere else. And so the importance of the purposeful action of 4 years, the purposeful formative, again, foundational work sounds like it's pretty evident in how your team is working. And hopefully, I'm excited. I want to hear updates, kind of how this continues to roll out and impact, because again, we're coming out of years of really seismic change that are showing, I'm assuming for you, I'm not going to speak for you, but showing the foundational crumbling of a lot of systems in our country and the world, how important it is for us to rebuild with a more sturdy foundation to be able to handle the uncertainty and the change that is inevitably coming.
Yeah, and honestly, even on that front too, I think a lot of the times change is the only constant, right? So I think
Yes.
those who can adapt quickly and keep up with the constantly moving environment are the ones that stay grounded probably the most. But it shows. I think you can only fake something for so long, but and you can only talk for so long too before people start questioning and holding you accountable for not taking action.
Yeah, yeah, I love that so very much. So one of the things that I think is, and you talked about representation as being something that wasn't necessarily front of mind in 2017, or at least not talked about as broadly as a part of me. It's like representation has always been something so important when you're always looking for yourself out in the world or versions of yourself out in the world. But one of the things that I did an episode, I don't know, probably a month ago about the power of representation out in the world around us. And in particular, how in media and TV and movies, we've been seeing representations of more people with different identities, and the ability to not have their identity be the only thing you know about them, or to play out some version of a stereotype or some caricature of a person. One of those that I was so very moved by in a country that does really only teach Ottoman Empire and 9/11, and no longer, um, is how Miss Marvel normalized, but also just brought you into the Pakistani American family, and you got the experience of being like sitting at the table and hanging out. Can you talk a little bit about what it is like? Because again, I'm a little bit older than you, and I remember some exposure to other things, for especially again as you're shaping a curriculum for people that are learning in school, how powerful it is to not just have that in school but also in the media. What was your experience in kind of seeing that, especially as you're advocating for policy and programming that is more inclusive?
Yeah, phenomenal question. It's really hard to imagine yourself in a space where there isn't someone who already looks like you represented there. And in the TV and film industry in particular, when people are acting as just everyday versions of themselves and you don't see yourself represented in that way, talk about re- just doubling down on this otherization
Yeah.
narrative. And I think simple concepts such as like, yes, these are people who also eat dinner and hang out with their family, and this is what marriage looks like in this their formal traditional processes and things of that sort.
Yeah.
All of that just breaks down other barriers and preconceived notions that people have. And I agree. To me, growing up, the extent of representation I feel like I saw was Princess Jasmine, which we're
Right.
grateful for. Like, thank you. But to see that just in a generation, the advancements we've made in this industry, that's, I think, coming to stay. And whether
Yeah.
it's to follow a trend or whether not, I think the outcome of it, regardless, is one that has thoroughly been appreciated for not just for me, but again, I think it's a testament to what you said as well.
Yeah, so okay. This is my kind of last question I'm gonna ask, and also I feel like it's been threaded through all of this conversation. Is can you talk a little bit about any wisdom that you have to share for anybody that's sitting here being like, okay, I don't feel like I've been represented, or there's an aspect of me that I feel like I've had to be silent about. What kind of advice would you provide or wisdom can you share around activating that version of yourself that's able to tell their story in front of 500 thousands of people, that's able to advocate for, yes, the identity buckets that they fill, but also just creating space for other identity buckets? What kind of wisdom and advice would you share?
I feel like I have a couple pieces of advice and wisdom, but I'll try to boil it down to what comes to first. So I think the first is we have made leadership something greater than ourselves. And because of that, we think it's unattainable, it's unachievable. It's like, I can't, make these strides. I can't make a difference because who am I to be a leader?
Yes.
But I've really coined this idea of everyday leadership, right? It's the traits that you influence those in your circle around you. You touch the lives of the people that you interact with on a day to day basis. And you start on that micro scale, and that's what you build up. The second thing I'll add is everyone wants to make a positive difference, but when it comes to like the prioritizations, I always say it comes, the way you choose to prioritize is different for everyone, but I always say it goes in order of like faith slash higher power, God, whatever that looks like, you, yourself, family, friends, community. And I put community last because you sometimes, like even me and a bunch of people as activists, we put community before ourselves sometimes. And how can you feel this, a lot of work needs to be done if you're not fulfilled from within. So for me, like that meant I was skipping meals and I wasn't prioritizing my health, and I got extremely burnt out. Therefore, the order of operations you set for yourself is a really important grounding principle on that front too. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that society has kind of brainwashed us into thinking that there is only one seat at the table for someone that looks like you or for someone that looks like me. And frankly speaking, that's just not true. That's what tokenization is. But by default, people from the same communities are now pitted against one another, fighting for the same opportunities and thinking that we're competition instead of collaborating, and that's not okay. Therefore, for me, when it's fun to be the token, but I want to be remembered as the connector. So the next time I get asked to come to a fancy event or something like that, I never want to be the only young person in the room, the only Muslim person in the room, the only young Muslim girl in the room, right? So to ensure that I'm not, I ask for a few more comp tickets and bring others of similar backgrounds who wouldn't have access to be in a space like this otherwise. And that's what I mean by everyday leadership. It's the little things you can do every day that become your habits that later become your character.
Ooh,
So,
I
peace.
love it.
Yeah.
You're like speaking my language on so many levels. I think there is a part to this that really is about honoring and acknowledging the fact that we've been sold some stuff that's not true about who we are, what our capacity is, and our capability is as a leader. I always talk to people about the fact that you are the leader of your life. You're making the decisions of each and every one of your moments in this life, hopefully. And you're the person that has to be there for all of it. So why not step into the shoes of leader there? And also understanding, and I think this is what you were talking about the tokenization, that if you're a leader, that doesn't mean everybody else must follow you. Doesn't mean that there is a one hierarchy specific element that like I am superior, therefore you are inferior. Unfortunately, we have been taught that is the way that civilizations operate, when in reality, that's not necessarily what happens. So I'm so grateful for all, I mean, the amount of wisdom you have shared in this hour is beautiful. I'm so grateful for your time and also just for your candid willingness to share so much. And let me also say this, I'm so excited to be able to watch what you do, watch you work, and to see the impact and the ripple effect of how you're just showing up as yourself. Because truly, the way that you're talking about these things, it sounds so easy and normal. And yet I know that there are a lot of barriers and challenges to being able to do that. And so know that you have an advocate over here. And I already know the audience members are like, yeah, me too. So just please keep us informed of all the things that are going on. And if there's any way I can be of support or we can be of support, please let us know. Keep doing you. And thank you so much for joining.
Oh my gosh, that means so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for uplifting and amplifying my voice and my story today.
Oh, you make me cry. That's why I do what I do. No. All right, my fellow connector, thank you so much for joining. And for for people that want to follow you directly, how do they do that?
Yes, it's Bushra Amiwala on all platforms.
Okay, done. And if you're on in the car or something, you don't know that, we have a show notes page where you can go. We're going to link it in here. You can go and take a look and follow from there if you're trying not to type and drive your car. I understand. Please don't. All right, Bushra, thank you so much. And I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you. You too.
Quite a conversation, wouldn't you say? Bushra is, I believe, even more powerful of a force than I probably led you to believe in the beginning, even though I was listing off all those accomplishments. I hope you are feeling the chills that I felt. I hope you're feeling even more activated to share your story and own and understand the power and the place that you have in this world to create a foundation that is inclusive, to connect with one another, and to see the world through more empathic eyes. The world around us and our society around us doesn't always encourage us to do that. That this idea of inclusion is not something that's a trend, but it is a foundational, sturdying factor as the world continues to transform and change and evolve. And those of us that are willing to ask the question why, to lead with curiosity and empathy, to connect with one another, even if we're different, we are the ones that will be able to chart more sturdy footsteps forward. And so if you are thinking about stepping into your leadership, or thinking about sharing your story, I encourage you to do it. If you want to try it out first, feel free to reach out. You can go to nikkyinnocent.com/podcast, and we have a way for you to reach out to us there. You can share your other story, whether you want to do it in writing, or you can give us a call and leave a voicemail and share your story there. But your story matters, and your leadership style and your leading of your life matters so very much. Understand that the actions that you take and the connections that you make are those ripple effects that turn into waves, that turn into a tidal wave to change so much of our future. So I hope that after all of this, you are feeling even more activated to trust your intuition and to get to know yourself. I cannot wait to see you in the next episode.